Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to this month's edition of Spirit Talk. Our guest this month has spent his life exploring the world of the strange and investigating the paranormal around the world. Now, he's written and lectured on a diverse range of topics, including hauntings, cryptozoology, ufology, and psychic phenomena, and also ancient mysteries. Now, he studied shamanic traditions with elders from numerous cultures, including those from Europe, Tibet, the Americas, and Africa. He's appeared on numerous television programs and is a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. Also a popular speaker at events worldwide. You may recognize him from some of our previous podcasts. His books include Haunted Toys, Strange Intruders, and the Wood Knock series. Please welcome for the show, David Weatherly. Hey, Dave, how are you?
Hey, Chris. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, man.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the show. Now, I got this email that you had this new book come out, and it's called Haunted Toys.
Actually, what happened, I co-wrote this book with a friend of mine, a fellow named Ross Allison. And Ross and I were kicking around a couple of ideas for a book. And we're actually sort of leaning towards something else. And in the course of the conversation, we started talking about haunted dolls, of course, of which there are tons. And Ross threw it out there and said, what about haunted toys? And it just kind of, light bulbs went off for both of us, I guess. And we thought, wow, nobody's done that. And, there it was. We took it and ran with it. And the result is indeed haunted toys.
I know there's been a couple TV shows out there that have dealt with certain items that are haunted, of course, such as Haunted Collector. And then one of the shows, I forgot the name, it eludes me at the moment, that Zach Baggins did that's on Travel Channel. And there seems to be so many items out there that are haunted. Do you know some of the reasons why, toys and items become haunted?
Well, I think there's a wide range of reasons for that, Chris. Zach's show, Deadly Possessions, I thought was really nicely done. And, of course, as you noted, Haunted Collector. This is something that has been really fascinating to people, particularly in the last several years, but really for people involved in the paranormal like you and I have been for our whole lives. We've constantly encountered these things. I know that, over the years investigating places, I've often investigated sites where the activity seemed to center around a particular object, whether it was a toy or something else. And often that links back to a couple of things. One of the reasons I think is that the object is often a focal point of a person who has passed over. And a portion of their energy, if you will, becomes attached to that object. And it causes these hauntings that are sometimes residual, sometimes, maybe there's something a bit more going on. And then, of course, we get into all the different stages of types of hauntings, because there is the possessed object, where some entity, we don't know whether it was a human or something else, has taken up residence in a particular object for whatever reason. Again, it's usually because it's something that has a strong attachment to the family who's being plagued by the activity.
Growing up as a kid, our house was haunted. And I had a little doll. I still have the doll. I just actually found it about a year ago, so storage, and I put it in a cabinet. His name was, I called him Ranger, and my mom said, I remember when some of the activity started occurring in the house, I became terrified of this doll. And I remember at one point, I had placed the doll in one part of the room, and the morning when I woke up, it was in a completely different part, and it scared the hell out of me. So after that, I said, take it away. I don't want this doll. So my mom, I told her to throw it away. She didn't throw it away. She actually stored it, and then I found it many years later. There's that fear that we get about dolls. And I know my sister had some dolls, and my mom had these wooden dolls that she had in her room, in this cabinet. And just the look that some of these dolls have, and that fear that it's going to blink or it's going to turn its head and look at you, I mean, that's really terrifying. Yet, we have all these stories in your book about many possessed dolls. Why do they choose dolls?
And dolls creep a lot of people out. Let's not forget that.
Right.
There's a lot of people that have a real phobia of dolls. That's really something. My God, it's a topic all on its own. If you start looking at different cultures and how they approach the idea of dolls. That's very fascinating. And we didn't have a chance to cover that really much in the book, but it's something I've looked at over the years. If you look at, for instance, the Amish, who they do these faceless dolls because their belief is that you shouldn't make something that is in the image of a human. And that gets really curious to me, because if you sort of juxtapose that with the idea of a voodoo doll, whose purpose is to represent a human so that you can do sympathetic magic on it and create ill effects, then it sort of gives you two different ends of the spectrum of how people consciously and subconsciously think about the idea of a doll. There's this predisposed idea that the doll, because it's in the shape of a living human, so to speak, that it has some of those qualities. And I think that in and of itself lends a lot of different possibilities. One is that, as we mentioned earlier, the possibility of something possessing a doll. And, since it's a human form, moving into it and taking up residence, if you will. Children, of course, relate to dolls as if they are living beings already. To a certain degree, there's a level of comfort in that, because for many children, that's their first friend, or their only friend sometimes. And we have to question, if you start looking at the energetic and psychic side of things, what happens with a doll that has energy built into it year after year after year, has a living being. We could be getting into Tulpa territory with those types of ideas. Of course, the negative side of it comes along too, when you get dolls that have something very nasty attached to them that start acting out. Of course, stories like Annabelle or Robert the Doll.
You talk about, people get attached to dolls. They project their emotions into these dolls, their memories into these dolls. And thoughts are very powerful. So I'm sitting here thinking while you're talking that, certain entities and spirits can be attracted to those dolls, to attach themselves to it. Also will sometimes maybe want to bring comfort to somebody, or in some way they will feed off of some of those emotions and those negative energies that may be attached to a doll. The emotions, getting sad, getting upset. I'm sitting here thinking too, what if it's possible that in a way we might even project or create some form of PK, some extension of ourself that comes into being because of this doll, and then that extension is attached to the doll.
Exactly, and that was that's sort of what the territory I was going into by mentioning the Tulpa idea. Tulpa, for those who don't know, is a Tibetan term, and it essentially is an entity that is created from pure thought into full physical form. So there's a really famous story involving a woman named Alexandra David-Niel, who in the early 1900s journeyed to Tibet, studied with lamas, and learned this process of creating a tulpa. And when you really start looking at it in detail, what she did, she first created this entity in her consciousness and spent so much of a process and so much energy projecting it outward that it took full physical form. But if you sort of put something in between that and it being a doll or another object, and you say, okay, what happens if a person projects so much energy into, Robert being a living entity, then yeah, I think it's fully possible. I think it's possible to, for a part of our energy to take up resonance there, or for something else to be going on where it takes on almost its own consciousness because you pour so much energy into it. The whole avenue of psychic phenomena in those terms is just such a fascinating world, because modern science, quantum sciences in particular, are just now starting to catch up to a lot of ancient ideas and saying, oh, okay, well, they've been talking about that for thousands of years ago, but hey, we just proved it with science, so it's real. The human energy field, science hasn't even believed in that for very long. It's been 20 years or something. So it's just it's really intriguing territory, I think.
You talk about the Tibet, you talk about some of the ancients. I'm sitting here thinking, with the voodoo that you mentioned as well, when I was in the Yucatan Peninsula a few years ago with the Mayans, I talked about the Alush
Yes.
which they named some of the ancient spirits there, and that how they could also trap or have a loosh get attached to these clay figures. They would make clay figures, and they would do this ritual, and the loosh would become attached to this clay figure. And I remember going through the museum, seeing all these different figures, and they were really creepy. And I got some incredible EVPs when I was in there, and I came home with some of the materials to create my own little loosh, make my own little doll out of clay. But I just did not want to do that. Last thing I need to have is some spirit attached to some item, and it goes along with the genie, having the genie in the bottle.
Oh, yes.
Is it that some of these dolls and these things that they're getting trapped or they're getting attached, whether they want to or not, to these items? And is that what's happening to some of these toys?
Oh, sure. I absolutely think that happens sometimes. Yeah. And it's, you bring up the jinn, which of course is another fascinating area. And I've done a lot of work with, of course, I wrote about them in Strange Intruders. And again, this is that same concept of a spirit or an entity being trapped in an object. And, the jinn, or genies as they're known in the West, are kind of a joke to us. But if you go back and look at their origins and their history, you're getting into really creepy, sinister territory. And these are, if you go back to the earliest tales of the jinn, you'll find that they were one of the three races that were created by God or Allah. And this is the race that refused to bow down to the superiority of man. So they were banished. But the banishment, if you read it closely, it sounds like they were just banished to another dimension or another level of existence, because they're not destroyed, they're just banished, but they still live among us. And when you go to areas like Asia or the Middle East, and I've traveled in a lot of these regions, and they talk about the jinn, how the jinn can live in abandoned homes, they can live in a rock that's in the desert. Virtually anything the jinn can take up residence in. And you kind of fast forward to the Middle Ages, when ceremonial magic became really widespread. You had these guys running around intentionally trying to trap jinn within pieces of jewelry originally, so that they could control them. And the whole gimmick was, okay, this ring has a jinn and it will grant you 3 wishes. Well, the hook was, it'll give you 3 wishes and then it's released. That's what the whole intent of the ceremony was. And that's where we get the whole genie in the lamp story, that these jinn are trapped in something, and with a certain amount of wishes, then they'll grant them to you, yes, but then they get their freedom, and that's something you don't want. And this is we could do a whole show on this, because there's been so much. I've spoken to and worked with so many people coming back from the Middle East, being stationed over there since the first Iraqi war and so forth, who have brought items back with them, and they've unintentionally brought a lot of trouble because they brought jinn.
You talk about dolls, you talk about items, you talk about idols. And if we look at some of the ancient texts of scriptures and even the Apocrypha, the book of Enoch, when you have the Elohim, Nephilim, and you have these fallen giants, these fallen angels that were created, the offspring of men, women, and yet they were wiped out by man and by the flood. And they cursed man and says, forevermore we will haunt you, we will oppress you, try to destroy you. So they're no longer in a physical body. They're a spirit, an entity that's now roaming around this dimension, this earth, looking for a vessel to take over. And if they can't get into a physical body, they sure as hell can learn ways to attach themselves to objects, because idols were worshipped. And even Moses says, stop worshiping these false idols. These are evil spirits. These are not real. These are not God. But yet people would worship some of these entities. And these entities are still around. So is it possible that some of these entities are possessing some of these objects?
Oh, I absolutely believe that. Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at, various waves of religion that became dominant in the world, one of the first things they would do if it was an, quote, aggressive takeover, they would go into an area that was pagan and they would destroy the idols, because that was the focal point of how people visualized this entity, and that led to them, having the experiences, having the point of reference, so to speak, of how their entity was going to appear and manifest to them, and so on and so forth. And they would take those things away, and it would leave the people without a focal point. So what did they do? They would turn to the Christian church, or whatever religion had taken over. It's really fascinating. You get into this area, you look at voodoo, which we've referenced a couple times already. Well, one of the fascinating things about voodoo is that it was never really taken over in that way, because when the Catholic Church went into a lot of these areas practicing different forms of voodoo, the practitioners said, okay, well, these saints manifest the same things as our Orisha, or our Loa. So they just transferred their idol worship, if you will, over and said, okay, well, this saint represents this Orisha. This saint represents that deity. And they kept on with their practices. It never stopped. So, a lot of these, in that way, a lot of those traditions remained very, very intact. It was just this bizarre marriage of, Catholic tradition and their traditional African beliefs, or, Haitian or whatever. There's a lot of regions that practice those traditions. And you go down, you really see it if you go down to areas like Brazil, where candomblé is still so dominant. It's just another Afro-Caribbean tradition, and it's married in with Catholic traditions. Santeria here in this country is a lot more widespread than people realize. It's pretty amazing when it comes down to it, that they were able to adapt in that way.
When you mention like a point of reference, a focal point, it's like there's a meeting place. And I was thinking about this last week, because we've been working on certain forms of spirit communication and looking at new technology and stuff like that. Is in some of the greatest communicators, is there is an agreement that they set with the spirit world, where to meet, how to meet, and that agreement is accepted on both sides, and then they meet. That's where they establish this incredible communication. The same thing can be said in worship. Same thing can be said in projecting that out there. We have a doll, we have an idol, we have a figure that someone's holding it, wishing for certain things, or projecting, I wish this happened, or I wish that didn't happen. And an entity comes along, just like if you're doing the Ouija board, and it hears this message and says, oh, I'm going to go mess with them, or I'm going to pretend to give them that. And they use that toy, that doll, that product, that item as the focal point, reference point to attach themselves to, but also communicate around to that other person. And I think that's how this consciousness may be working with these spirits. Who knows? But it's just mind-boggling. It's just mind-boggling. We look at psychometry. Psychometry is taking an object someone's owned, and it's got memories and emotions attached to it. We know that happens, that there is such a thing as reading people's memories on an object. I mean, you look at DVDs, you look at CDs, photographs. That person's no longer here anymore, but yet here's a recorded history. There's a memory of them that's attached, and there's some emotion to that.
Right.
So this gets passed on to toys.
Yeah.
Now, all the toys that you've investigated, which toy really stood out to you?
I've already mentioned him, probably Robert the doll.
Okay.
Just because of the provenance. He has such a history at this point. And Robert, they're still uncovering a lot of information about Robert. Robert the doll is in Key West. He's in the Martel Museum at this point. Now, this doll, the original story, which I'll tell you because it's the creepier version, the original story was that a little boy named Robert Eugene Otto was given this doll by a maid in their house, and she was from one of the islands somewhere in the Caribbean. And the story was that she had handmade this doll and that she cursed it to have a life of its own. So that was the story that dominated for many years. And the tale was told that when Robert received this doll, that he immediately named it Robert, which was his name. He gave it his name. And from that time on, he was to be called Gene. His middle name is Eugene. So he gave this doll his own name. And that's consistent in both versions of the story. Now, what happened after that was that anytime something happened in the house, the immediate cry from Gene was, Robert did it. So dishes would get broken, things would get torn up, accidents would happen. Robert did it. But it got really bizarre because strange things would start to be noticed by his parents and other people when Gene wasn't around. And as the years wore on, the short version of the story, because it's kind of a long tale, was that the Gene moved away. He left Robert in the house, and he went off to school and went over to Europe for a time. He ends up coming back when he's much older. He moves back into the home with his wife, and there's Robert sort of waiting for him. Well, he gives Robert his own room. It's the attic room upstairs. And there are all these stories of school children in the area started avoiding walking by the house after school because they said that Robert the doll would always appear in the window and move around, or he would be seen sitting in his rocking chair in the window, rocking by himself and staring out at them. People would go to this home and they would hear little footsteps running upstairs when everyone else was downstairs. Now, over the years, there are a few things that have been found out about the doll itself. They sort of debunked the whole story of the African maid giving the doll to Robert, and they found out that the doll actually came from Germany and was a unique item because it was a display. It was originally made for a display. So it's sort of a one-of-a-kind doll that was made specifically to market something at the time. Gene's grandfather went on a trip to Europe and brought the doll back and gave it to the boy when he returned. Now the rest, a lot of the other parts of the story are still true. The boy did give the doll his own name and called him Robert. And Robert the doll, the legend that has grown up around him is just kind of mind-boggling. Since he's been in the museum, he sits in a glass case, and the story is that if you go in to see Robert and you want to take a picture, you have to ask his permission. If you don't, bad luck will befall you. This museum has hundreds, Chris, literally hundreds of letters from people who thought it was a joke. They came in, they made fun of Robert, they took a picture and didn't ask permission, and a whole string of bad luck ensued. Car accidents, sickness, loss of job, relationship loss, misfortunes. So they've got all these letters addressed to Robert, sincerely asking his forgiveness and saying,
Wow.
Please, forgive me for making fun of you or for taking your picture without asking and so forth. So, even the people that work in the museum they give Robert a lot of respect. It's not worth taking the chance. And they've had a few odd things happen. At one point in recent history, a little stuffed lion suddenly appeared in Robert's glass case with him.
What?
Yes.
Holy cow.
Well, the lion came from another display, but no one in the museum did it. So one night after they closed up, they checked on everything, closed up. The next day when they came back, somebody's cleaning the cabinets, and they noticed that there's something in the cabinet with Robert, and they realized it's this little stuffed lion. And it of course, it really freaked the whole staff out, and everybody's like, we're not taking it away from him. Just leave it there. So it's as if Robert decided that he wanted something in the case with him, and somehow obtained this little stuffed animal.
Have you ever done any work or know anybody that's done, EVPs and stuff around some of these objects?
Oh, I've done them around a lot of different haunted objects. Not Robert, but other haunted dolls and so forth. And we've had some really strange things occur. There's a whole other set of things that happened with, and it's actually not in the book. So this is a sort of a bonus story. I was at the Rhodes Hotel in Indiana about a year ago, with a good friend of mine, Dave Spinks. And we did an investigation at the roads. We actually stayed there for several days, just had the place to ourselves. It was a very active location. But in one of the bedrooms, in a closet, there was a shelf full of dolls. And we had some really bizarre things happen with those dolls. First of all, at one point, one of them moved. It was on the bed. And we're not sure how it got there. There was nobody else in the house. At another point, we had some really strange EVPs come from these dolls. We had really strange activity with an SLS cam around these dolls. And it looked like something was manifesting, trying to hit anyone who was around it at this point. The woman who owned the roads actually asked me to take the dolls away because she was convinced that one of them had been cursed, if you will, to cause trouble by someone who had previously worked at the roads with her. So, these objects, a lot of times I think that there's two things. One is that they can certainly be used as trigger objects in certain areas, right, especially if it's an object that belongs there. But then on a whole other level, they do take on their own energy, and they will lead to manifestations of a wide range.
You write a lot about dolls in here, but then also you've got other things like, for example, the Charlie game. And you've even got a Nintendo game, a haunted Nintendo game, right?
Yeah.
Tell me the story about the haunted Nintendo game.
The Nintendo, it was really curious because when we set out to do the book, dolls were easy. There's just so many of them. It was more of, okay, which ones do we do and which do we leave out? So that's a chunk of the book. And then we wanted to do games, and we did some other assorted toys, and then we did a chapter on locations that have a strong association with toys that are also haunted. So the games, I'll tell you, it was really kind of interesting to me because I honestly expected to find a lot more to do with video games because they've been so dominant in our culture for, years now, and they're so widespread. I thought there's bound to be a bunch of stories, but there weren't. There really weren't. The haunted NES that we did find that was rather fascinating. It involves a guy who buys this old NES system at a pawn shop, and he takes it home. And the short version of the story is that he finds out that it belonged to a man whose son had died, and he left the game up in his attic for quite some time, and finally got rid of it, sold it to a pawn shop. And this fellow who had this NES started having all these strange electronic experiences, interference. When he was playing the game, the game would freeze up. They would hear this weird static at times. It looked like the characters would go under their own control. And the whole legend was that somehow this little boy's spirit had become attached to the game because, just as we were talking about earlier, it was the one thing that this little boy really loved the most and seemed most attached to. So, perhaps a part of his consciousness or his energy or something remained with that game. And being an electronic-based toy, it led to these strange glitches and different types of interference.
Don't want to be picking that up at a garage sale. Get more than you bargained for.
Well, I think that's true whenever you're shopping in a thrift store or antique shop or anything else.
I don't like to really buy stuff at garage sales or hand-me-downs because you don't know what's attached to it,
The one, Chris, one of the ones that really kind of got to me, there's a haunted monkey story in there, and I know that you were asking me about that one off air. And that story, it has a tragic side, I think, too, of what we can see happen in these cases. And that was a story about a family that they moved into a home. The woman's name was Misty, and she had a little brother. Her little brother was sort of a little bit of an odd kid. He didn't really like to play with toys much. When they moved into this new house, it was an older house. This little boy found one of those old toy monkeys on the shelf in his closet. And this is going to sound familiar to a lot of people. It's that iconic little monkey with the cymbals that bang together. and it's appeared in a few different movies, over the years. And this little boy just automatically loved this monkey. It was old and dirty and it didn't work, but he loved this thing. And since he didn't really play with toys, his parents said, yeah, you can keep it. The sister was completely creeped out by this thing. It just really, she didn't want to be around it. And her brother would leave this thing all over the house. So she'd come in and there it is, sitting on a shelf. She said she felt like it was always staring at her. And one day she's in the house watching TV by herself. The family's outside, and this monkey is on the mantle. And all of a sudden, the symbols clang together. And it scared the daylights out of her, and she ran out and told her parents. And her parents were convinced she was just imagining it, because the father, who liked to tinker with things, had tried to fix the monkey and said there was no way. The mechanism was so rusted that it was just frozen. It wouldn't work at all. Right after the symbols banged together, family received a phone call that the grandfather had passed away. So she felt like this was sort of an omen, and it happened again. And again, she was the only person who heard it. Now, the tragic side of the story is that she grew up and went to college, and her brother died he died young, died in a car accident. And years later, when she went back to the family home to help her parents move to a retirement area or whatever, she was helping clean the place out. She came across this monkey. And her first reaction was, oh, my gosh, this monkey. And she said that, the first thing she thought when she saw it was she wondered if it had banged its symbols when her brother died. But she couldn't bear to throw it away. So she took it home, and she put it in this cabinet. And she's told me that she will, on occasion, hear her brother's voice around this monkey. So she's convinced that, part of his spirit stayed with this little toy that he loved so much. It was the only toy that he ever really, cared to play with or have much. And she said that, she prays all the time, but she never hears it bang its cymbals again.
When you've got other toys, other games, and it goes really into scary realms, I mean, you become terrifying. I mean, you got like the game Charlie, that went viral a few years ago. And I know I played the game, and some friends of mine told me about it and went over to their house, and it was pretty wild. And they filmed it, and I had posted it online how it reacted when it said my name and what I do, and it went nuts. What's your impression of that game? You obviously researched it for the book Haunted Toys, and you wrote about it. What was your impression of that game?
Yeah, I had written about Charlie previously, actually, when it did go viral. And, like you, just found the whole thing kind of fascinating. Now, we talk about both Charlie and Ouija boards in there and a few other things. Bloody Mary, which is kind of an urban legend to a degree. But I think really what you get into with these games is that you have young children flinging open the doors to communicate with absolutely anything that is willing to come through. And that's where the danger lies. I have this Ouija board debate all the time, and I'm sure you do too, because, so many people in the paranormal field are convinced that Ouija boards are, handmade by Satan himself. And it kind of, people give so much power to these objects. And that's usually one of my first responses to these people. If you're a Christian, if you have that strong faith, why are you giving so much power to an object? It's not the board itself that is inherently evil. It's the folly with the method that people use to try to utilize these things. It's a form of spirit communication is what it comes down to. I'm talking about the Ouija board in particular.
Right.
People again focus so much negativity into Ouija boards, and when you look at the dynamic that very often these are young kids pulling these things out. Oh, we're going to communicate with a demon or, Lucifer or, whatever. And what do? They sit down and they say, anyone that's here, you're welcome to communicate.
Anyone that's here, anyone that wants to talk to us. Yep.
There is your invitation. And to me, you know, the Charlie Charlie thing, I think it's sort of a modern manifestation or version of this. And really, let's be honest, if you look at the basics of Charlie Charlie, it's kind of stupid. You know, I poked a little bit of fun with the way I wrote about it in the book because, you know, imagine this conversation. Hey, you know, you want to play this game, we can communicate with a Mexican demon. You know, oh, really? What's his name? Charlie. A Mexican demon named Charlie. That alone, you know. But that's the story that traveled around in all the circles. What was that there was a Mexican demon named Charlie Charlie, and that he would answer any question you ask. Oh, by the way, you have to ask his permission to stop. Well, that's kind of odd. That's part of the game.
Wow. I didn't know that part.
Oh, yeah.
Oops. Let me write that down 2 years later. No wonder all these bad things happened.
You have to ask Charlie's permission to stop asking questions. So, you know, this is, again, really strange territory.
That's creepy.
Yeah, it's very creepy. It's very creepy. And, of course, you know, as you know, it's for listeners who might not be familiar with it, it simply is balancing a pair of pencils, you know, in the form of a cross. With yes or no written in the grid around the pencils. And doing this little, quote, ritual to summon Charlie Charlie, a Mexican demon, to come and answer your questions.
Yeah, and I tell you, when that pencil's moved, I mean, there are times we did it and it didn't do anything. You know, I was like, what the hell, you know?
Yeah, sure.
But there was times when it moved with such a fluid movement, very similar to when the Ouija board works. You know, when the Ouija board's actually gliding around there. It's such a fluid movement. It's almost like perfect. And you're just like, whoa. It's not like an abrupt. It's just a fluid, different movement, as if it has a mind of its own. It's pretty wild. I'm not telling anybody to go out there and play this game. This was a couple years ago, you know.
and you know, ultimately, I mean, this is, you know, we'll go down the rabbit hole with this because we have to question, well, this could indeed be some type of entity that's coming through and taking advantage of the door being flung open and the invitation, or it could be simply our, you know, higher consciousness connecting in and answering the questions or manipulating the device. I mean, I think that's a possibility with the Ouija board too. I think that there are times when it simply is a tool for people to access their own intuitive abilities, just like tarot cards or anything else. And, you know, the difference between spirit communication with a Ouija board and spirit communication, say, with a ghost box, is that you have that dynamic of the physical connection. You know, you have to, it's more kinetic in that your hands have to touch that planchette. You know, you have to be more
physical contact.
Exactly. And, you know, people, a lot of investigators think that there's, you know, a complete difference between doing that and using a ghost box. And, you could argue really that there's not, other than the kinetic, you know, the physical contact. But who knows? And who knows what the future is going to bring? You know, how much are we manipulating radio waves or EVPs or anything else?
True. And the one thing too, just to mention, you know, there was a lot of, you know, fraud with the Charlie Charlie game too. People were blowing on it and stuff like that. But, you know, when that was prohibited and there was a distance and everything, to see this thing move was just, it reminded me of the old days when I used to do the Ouija board, when the thing used to fly across the board, you know, and it was pretty impressive. So it's just another form of communication, just a different way of communicating it.
Yeah, the problem, I think, with Charlie Charlie was that it was intentionally designed to contact something that is purportedly demonic. You know, the whole story of Charlie Charlie is that, hey, it's a demon. And, of course, you know, this brought it to the attention of the Catholic Church, which came out and made statements about it, which, of course, only helped it go viral all the more. You know, because,
sure.
Oh, okay, the church says not to do it, so let's go do it. You know,
exactly.
That whole, you know, appeal of the taboo.
Now, your book, Haunted Toys, you've obviously seen stuff in other countries, and you took a trip to the Island of Dolls.
Oh, yes.
How was that?
It's one of the strangest places I've ever been to in my life. Absolutely. It's, you know, the Island of the Dolls is outside of Mexico City. It's not easy to get to. You have to hire this boat to take you back there. And back when I went, uh, it was hard to find someone who would take you, which is true with a lot of these weird islands. I had the same experience trying to get to Poveglia. The locals don't want anything to do with it, and you try to convince some of these Mexican guys you want them to take you back to the island of the dolls and drop you off, and they think you're just insane. So
Right.
eventually you can hopefully find someone, and you have to pray that they'll come back for you at the appointed time, because they'll pull up just close enough that you can jump out in the water and wade the rest of the way up there. As a side note, I've recently learned apparently it's become such a popular tourist destination that there are several other islands now that they're filling with dolls so that they can take tourists there without having to go to the real island of the dolls,
Oh my God.
which they're all creeped out by.
Right.
The island of the dolls, the story is that purportedly a young girl died on the island. She drowned in the water. And this gentleman named Don Juan started to try to appease her spirit. And to do that, he would go into town and he would purchase these white candles and a doll and these gifts for this child, some candy, and then he'd bring it back to the island. Well, for some reason, Chris, he got sort of obsessed with trying to appease this girl's spirit.
I'll say.
and it consumed his whole life to the point where all he did was he would constantly go into the cities and he would borrow, barter, beg, whatever for dolls, and he didn't care if they were just pieces of dolls or old or what they were, just anything, any piece of a doll. Old, broken, whatever. And he would take it back to the island, and he would put it on the island. He'd string them up in trees. There's a little hut on the island. He's got them all over the hut. They're in the vegetation. And going to this place is so surreal because you get off this boat and you're walking around. It's like a bizarre Salvador Dali painting or something. You'll see a pair of eyes sort of glaring out at you from, a gnarled root and stuff, because a lot of the dolls have been there so long now that vegetation has grown all around them, and,
Right.
Insects have made nests in them, and, deterioration has set in on some of the older ones. So, some of them are decaying and falling apart, but, and they're just everywhere. And it's, I can't even, it's one of those places it's really difficult to describe to someone if they can't go there and see it for themselves visually. But man, it's such a bizarre place, and the activity there is kind of intense. There's EVPs. There's this strange knocking sounds that you hear around the little shed that's on there. It sounds like people running around the island at times. You'll hear laughter. Disembodied voices, all kinds of strange things. And of course, he later died himself on the island.
Oh, wow.
In a bizarre twist, he drowned in the water.
Of course he did.
So
yeah, just like her. Huh?
Yeah. So now, over the years, it became, for a long time, it was sort of a kind of secret. Some people knew about it, but it wasn't like it was on, in the tourist books or anything. So people would go just to see this curious place this guy had created, and they would take a doll. And that's the thing. Whenever you go there, you're supposed to take a doll in order to continue to appease this girl's spirit. So you can imagine over the years how many hundreds and hundreds of dolls have come to inhabit this island.
I remember seeing an episode of Destination Truth a few years ago, and I believe that was in 2009, fall of 2009. And he went to the Isle of Dolls, and it was creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever have interest of going there. I'll just watch it from
don't
a
invite
distance.
you on my next trip then.
No. Now you wrote, this book that you're talking about right now is The Haunted Toys. You've written a couple other books. I mean, we had you on before with Strange Intruders. talking about different types of alien species and different types of beings that people have seen. But you also wrote the book Wood Knocks, the Journal of Sasquatch Research. Tell us a little bit about that.
That is volume 1, and the idea was to, I've always been fascinated by cryptids, and I wanted to do something a little different. So what I did was contacted sort of what I consider an A-list of cryptozoologists and asked that they would contribute to this idea, which is why it's called a journal. And it has chapters in there from notables such as Richard Freeman, Lyle Blackburn, Ken Gerhard, Linda Godfrey, just a whole range of people that I think are pretty amazing when it comes to the study of this creature that we all call Sasquatch. Volume 2 is actually coming out this year.
Oh, congratulations.
And, it has a different cast of people, but equally as impressive, I think. And the idea is it'll be a series that probably 1 volume a year. And it gives people a chance to look at some topics that, wouldn't be enough material for an entire book, but that are fascinating nonetheless. For instance, in the first volume, Nick Redfern wrote about Sasquatch and infrasound and the possibilities of, this unknown creature using infrasound in some of the encounters that people report. My piece in Wood Knocks is about Sasquatch encounters on the Navajo Reservation in the Southwest, which surprised a lot of people, but there are a lot of accounts on Navajo land.
Yeah, it's always fascinated me since I was a child with In Search Of and some of the movies that came out, the documentaries, as well as some people that I've known over the years that have had their own personal experiences seeing these creatures.
Oh, yes.
Especially in Indiana. So for me, I've always been intrigued, what is the history of this beast? Is it dimensional alien, or is it just another species that coexists but's able to elude humanity for so long? I'm not too happy about, the show killing Bigfoot and this and that. I mean, of course, it's just a marketing thing, but it's like, give me a break.
Yeah.
You're going to kill him? It's like, why don't you just capture him or communicate with him? Yeah, let's go kill him.
Well, paranormal reality television has continued to deteriorate in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, it's gone too extreme. In some ways, but we've seen some of those extreme things really haven't worked out for certain networks. And I hope it continues that way when they do extreme stuff like that, because I don't think that's really what we want. We want to get to the root in the validating the evidence and proving it, and finding out more about it, not just creating these thrills and chills and ooh and ah type stuff.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
So, Dave, what else do you want to talk about regarding this haunted toys? I mean, this is a fascinating book for listeners. He's got little short stories here throughout every chapter. It's got a little story about a particular toy. And you've got about how many pages here? You've got about a little over 130 pages in this book. Nicely laid out, photograph or illustration for each different toy. And, you can sit down and have a cup of coffee. You can read one of these chapters within a couple minutes and not be able to sleep that night. So thanks, Dave.
Hey, that's what we were going for. Just quick props to my co-author on this book, actually, Ross Allison, who runs Spooked in Seattle, Ghost Tours in Seattle. If you're ever out that way, check it out. And we kind of split the toys half and half, and each covered some different things. One of the really creepy ones, I'll tell you, you want to be unsettled, was the Devil Baby Doll. And
Baby Doll.
I don't know.
You got me at the Devil Baby Doll right there.
I don't know if you had a chance to read that one or not, Chris, but this is another one that has just an incredible legend behind it. So the story goes back to New Orleans in the 1800s. And the tale goes that a woman ran off and married a wealthy man. And in the process of doing so, she left behind a jilted lover. This gentleman was so angered that he sought out the help of Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans, and asked her to curse this woman for him. So, of course, the price was right, and Marie Laveau did indeed levy a curse on this woman, which manifested with the birth of her first child, which came out horribly mutated and purportedly looking like the child of the devil itself. Now, Marie Laveau oddly felt so bad about the results of the curse that she took this child in herself and kept this little baby, which came to be known as the Devil Baby of New Orleans. Now, it gets really creepy because people said that this little baby would manifest in the back alleys and streets of old New Orleans, and that if you ran into it, you would be cursed. So, in order to try to protect themselves, people started carving replicas of the Devil Baby doll out of gourds. And they would do the little horns on the head and this bizarre looking sort of mutated baby figure. And they would hang these things on the porches of their homes to ward off this devil baby. Now, the devil baby's legend lived on for many years, long after the passing of Marie Laveau, and purportedly after the passing of the devil baby itself. People still reported seeing it in the streets of New Orleans. If we fast forward to modern times, it gets even more fascinating, because an artist in New Orleans who is particularly fascinated by the old history of the city decided that he wanted to try to recreate the Devil Baby doll. So he started making these custom Devil Baby dolls that he would sell as pieces of art. But purportedly, these modern Devil Baby dolls carry the energy of the original New Orleans Devil Baby. And people started reporting strange activity around the modern versions of these dolls. So much so that some people returned the item and decided they couldn't handle being around it, because they were reporting disembodied voices, that the doll would move on its own, that there would be poltergeist-like activity in their home after bringing this Devil Baby home. So it really, it's an incredible story, and it's a slice of the magic of old New Orleans that has carried through into modern day.
I wonder if the movie Rosemary's Baby came from that.
It's
Legend.
possible, yeah.
I'm sitting here listening to your stories, and I'm just like, I read the Mr. Creepy one, and which was creepy as hell. And the murderous puppet. The murderous puppet. Oh, I wanted to talk about that. The murderous puppet was really creepy. The guy getting choked and stuff, and he looks and believes it's the doll. And how that the cross part of it moved in the casing.
Yeah.
Which is so great. Now eBay is going to start seeing a lot more toys jumping online being sold after people start reading your book.
There's already a lot of them that get sold on there.
Yeah, I've actually seen that.
Mm. The Myrtles story is great too. Did you read that?
No. Wait, did I? Myrtles Plantation?
Yeah, there's a story that I got from. You've been to the Myrtles, yeah?
Oh God, yeah. The children there.
The
children ghosts. I got their voices on recording. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the Myrtles. I've been there a bunch of times. But the doll room upstairs, there's an account where a woman was staying there. It's in the book, but I'll tell you what it was. There's a guy. I don't know if he still works there or not. I haven't been in a couple of years. There's an older black guy named Moses that works at the Myrtles. He was telling me this story that he was working one day, and this woman who was staying at the plantation was staying up in the doll room. He saw her downstairs, and he started talking to her. And he said, "Wait a minute." He said, "Where's your baby?" And she says, "Oh, she's fine. She's in the stroller. She's asleep." And he freaked out. Of course, "You left her in the room. My God, you can't do that." He goes running up the stairs, bursts through the door. There's the stroller, wheels locked, baby fast asleep. But standing next to the stroller is one of the dolls from the mantel with its hand propped on the stroller.
Oh my God.
So he snatched the baby out of the stroller and, of course, ran downstairs. And
wow.
Yeah. But man,
that place is incredible, because we filmed there back in, I don't know if it was 2004, 2005 for Dead Famous. And we had one of the personnel there go in there and open up all the doors for us, unlock the doors so we can go in. The crew went and got all their equipment. I got some of my equipment. I was the first one back in there, and the door was locked. I'm like, wait a minute, she just unlocked this. So I said, hey, must have locked by itself. Could you unlock it? So she comes over, unlocks. She goes, I know I unlocked this. I go, yeah, you did. She unlocks it. I walk up the stairs to the second floor, and I notice all the doors to every room is closed. They're all locked.
Yeah.
So she had to come up and unlock all the doors.
Mm-hmm.
Someone not only locked the door, gaining us access to it, but closed and locked all the doors. And we know it was none of us and it wasn't her because we all walked out of there together.
Right.
So it didn't want us there. Plus, we caught some really great anomalies, some white lights floating across the room. I set up some cameras, and
Nice.
we walked out within a minute, 2 minutes leaving. There's one that flies right by this candle I got. It goes towards the candle, we're fluid, and then it flies away. And it's not a bug because it's glowing, and it leaves a little trail behind it, so it's some type of spiritual energy. So, yeah, that place is just, it's a
off the hook.
haven for activity.
But I think it's actually drawn a lot of the spirits to it. Rather than a lot of them being, you know the whole story of Chloe, right?
Oh, of course I do, yeah.
You know it's BS.
No. Is it really?
I think Chloe's a Tulpa.
What's a Tulpa?
A Tulpa is an entity that is created from thought. Yeah, I think Chloe has been created through the collective consciousness, because year after year of hundreds and thousands of people at this point going there looking for Chloe. There's even the famous photograph of Chloe behind the main house, in that alley.
Yep.
Which is an incredible photograph that no one's ever debunked. But there's no record of Chloe ever existing. And in fact, those children that she's purportedly killed, historical record shows they actually died of yellow fever.
Wow.
She didn't poison anybody. So it's a fancy story that's been passed down for, it's traced back. When I did a lot of research on it, and it traces back, I think, to I want to say maybe the 70s or so. But that's all the far back that it goes.
Yeah, I got to wonder too if with the Queen Mary, with the little girl,
Jackie.
Yeah. If that's the same thing, because there's really no story of
that's right.
Jackie. But even there's no story, doesn't mean that records weren't on not kept correctly of some little girl dying on the boat. You just don't know. But someone said that Disney had made it up, or someone had made up the idea of Jackie, but then all of a sudden she exists. But many of us that have been there, we've got our voices on recording, and many of us have heard her voice,
right.
In direct voice phenomenon, where we've all heard it with our own ears.
I've heard it too.
And seen her run across the pool or up on the second floor. I mean, I had her appear right in front of me a couple years ago, scared the hell out of me, but it didn't even seem like a child. It was like an all black figure with these big eyes, and it looked kind of zombie-like. I don't want to, get creepy with it, but it really freaked me out because it was like it was manifested from this black mass, and it stood there looking at me, and then it shot backwards, and as it went backwards down the second floor, not down the second floor, but away from me towards one of the walls, he manifested back into this black mass and then shot around the corner and then shot up and went up into the ceiling.
Yeah.
There's a part of you question reality when you see something like this. You've seen ghosts and this and that, but when you see something go backwards and you completely see it demanifest, you realize that consciousness is manifesting that whole thing, some form of consciousness. But is the manifestation a direct representation of what the entity actually is? Is it a little girl, or is it something else that's saying, hey, I'm going to look like this and take on this persona because this is what you're looking for, this is who you're searching for and trying to communicate with, so I'm going to appear like this. We don't know.
Yeah, and people get so hung up on the idea that no, it's the spirit of this particular person, and I think that if we're going to be open-minded and really come to some answers, we have to break down those walls and explore other possibilities and understand there's not going to be any one solution to explain all this paranormal phenomena. As much as a lot of people want there to be one answer, there's just not. Right. And you go down the rabbit hole with things like this. Is Jackie like you said, is it a spirit that is taking up that form because that's what everyone expects and it makes it easier to manifest? Or is she a creation of the collective consciousness? Again, thousands of people go there looking for Jackie. And in most people's minds, she exists as a little girl who died in the pool there. So, it could be a pure manifestation of thought. The human body has so much potential, that is untapped that, man, there's just no telling. So many possibilities.
Absolutely. And that goes along with the toys, with these entities, spirits, whether they're human beings or other disembodied entities that just want to attach themselves towards something and exist in some form.
That's right. Yeah.
As a toy.
Yeah, for positive or negative reasons,
Right. Well, Dave, I want to thank you for being on this show. I mean, some great topics.
Hey, it's always a pleasure, man.
For everybody listening, you've got to check out his book, Haunted Toys. You can also look at Strange Intruders in the Woodknock series on Amazon.com. But if you'd like to get a hold of Dave, go to his blog at twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com. That's twocrowsparanormal.blogspot.com, and we'll have those links up on the podcast. Any last words, Dave?
Hey, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Chris. And anybody has a story about haunted toys or something else intriguing, feel free to get in touch with me. I'd love to hear it.
Everybody listening, you've been listening to Chris Fleming and David Weatherly on Spirit Talk. See you next month.